G'day everybody, how are you going today? It is so good to see you. I do hope you are super well. Today we're here to talk about a new CF Express card. This is from Pergear. And for those that have been watching the channel for a while, you will know that I've been using Pergear cards for somewhere in the vicinity of 4 to 5 years. All of those cards are still functioning at 100%, not a single failure. And this is real world testing. I have used these cards pretty much on a daily basis, not the same card because I have a number of them to cycle around, but they're used a lot. At this point in time, I would be very comfortable in saying an investment, based on my experience in Pergear cards, is going to last the distance. And that's great, which is why today I'm happy to talk about a new card for them. It is a CF Express Type A. I've already reviewed a Type A previously on this channel. This is their next generation of Type A cards. And in putting this video together, I've observed that they've got an even faster generation of cards that has appeared on their website for Type A. So there's lots of opportunities and price points from Pergear for Type A cards. Now, it's actually here in my laptop plugged in with a Pergear card reader as we speak. And thus, the first thing I wanted to do was to conduct a speed test. So what I'm going to do here is a screen recording, and drive is selected, and we start. Now, we can see a little bit of a burst speed here at the start of the test, and then it starts to flatten out. And we can also see that the test runs for, what is that, 2,000, 3,000, 4. It's about a 10-second test. So when it comes to shooting bursts of stills, which some people like to do, 10 seconds is a really long burst. And if you're shooting at 20 frames or 30 frames per second, and you're doing that for 10 seconds, well, you've suddenly got 200 or 300 shots. And what we can see there is that this card is able to, in this particular test, it can sustain a write speed of somewhere around 600 megabytes per second. So depending on which camera, what the file sizes are, what compression you're using, whether you're in JPEG or not, you'll be able to sustain 10, 20, 30 frames per second. But for example, if you're using an A9 III or an A1, which can sustain large megapixels at high frame rates, or in the case of the A9 III, you can shoot RAW 24 megapixels at 120 frames per second. This card, it won't keep up with that, and you are reliant on the buffer. But what we can see here is that your buffer will empty very, very quickly. This is not their top-end card. This is sort of a mid-level card, but it's extremely affordable. And yes, before I go any further, why am I talking about the A9 III or the A1? And if you didn't pick up, this is CF Express Type A. Now, the only camera company that I think uses Type A, I'm pretty confident of this, is Sony. The advantage of Sony going in this direction is that they're able to create a slot in the camera, and the same slot, you just turn the card one way or the other, is either an SD slot or a Type A slot, effectively meaning that you can have 4 cards, but you can only ever load 2 of them at once. Personally, I think this approach has pros and cons. The pros are you can turn up with 2 SD cards and you're fine. You're still working. Obviously, that's slower. Or you can turn up with 2 Type A cards, you're still working. Or you can turn up with a hybrid of Type A and SD and you're still working. You've still got the redundancy, the whole idea of having 2 card slots. And Type A is a little bit different to Type B. Type A is much smaller. It's much more like an SD card, just slightly thicker. And it's also half the speed. But obviously the Gen 3 cameras that we have today, they're not going to get any faster and will work perfectly with the card that I have here today. And just to be clear, Gen 3 cards will work absolutely fine with new Gen 4 hardware. The hardware typically, not that we know because it doesn't exist yet, but the hardware typically is backwards compatible, which means you can put any CF Express Type A card of whatever generation into Gen 4. The whole point today of me talking about these cards are affordable. One of the biggest issues for Type A users for the last few years that this card slot has been out is the cards have been very expensive and there hasn't been many providers of them. And in the last year or so, that narrative has started to flip. And Pergear is an example of one of those card suppliers that is really offering great value. The card I have here is a 256 gigabyte card. It's easy to lose sight when I have 1 and 2 terabyte cards that 256 is not very big, which is kind of the case when you're shooting 8K video, but when you're shooting stills, it's absolutely enormous. Now, the Pergear cards are currently on sale. It's pretty impressive from my perspective that you can get this CF Express Type A card, 256 gigabyte card for 161 Australian dollars. And let me just flip this website over to US dollars. Yeah, it's pretty crazy. So in US dollars, it's $129 currently on sale for 103 US dollars and 20 cents. There's a half terabyte or 512 gigabyte card, which is 167 US dollars. That might be the sweet spot. That's an extraordinary amount of storage for that sort of money. Currently 20% off. And then they have what they call a VPG 200 card, a professional grade card, 1 terabyte, which is $415. Now, I'm not exactly sure what's different about these professional grade cards other than perhaps that they're certified, but 1 terabyte for $415. And if you want, you can choose packages that come with this card reader here. And yes, if you do want to get the Type A card, the 256 with the card reader, it's 123 US dollars. I do have a few Sonys in my cupboard. I don't actually own any personally that use Type A. Contemplating that. But the industry's moving so fast. There's a lot happening with Sony. I think at the end of this year, I'll wait to see what happens because I think the world is going to change for us all. And well, I can only presume that Sony will continue to use Type A in their flagship camera. Now, I've been playing with the E-mount version on the Sony a7R5. I'm going to show you a lot of images that I've managed to capture over the last week or so. This is not a review, it's not even a first look, it's more of a portfolio of amazing images from the outback so you can see how gorgeous and wonderful this lens is. Now, this is a 90mm f2.8 lens. The other thing that's really exciting about this lens is it's a macro lens and it has a ratio of 1:1. For those that don't know what that means, it means that you can get an image which is the same size as your sensor. So that means we can fill the frame with something that is 35mm. Now, of course, this is a full frame lens and I can attest to its weather sealing because we absolutely faced some amazing conditions at Uluru, which some of you might know as Ayers Rock if you've been here in the past, but we now know it by its indigenous name, Uluru. And we had some record-breaking storms, which I managed to photograph just a little bit, just for about half an hour, Uluru in the rain with this lens. That was 4 or 5 days ago, and the lens is still performing perfectly. We're in a desert, so there's lots of sand, there's lots of grit, there's lots of dirt, but we've also had lots of rain. There is a total of 7 Sony cameras in their range that currently use CF Express Type A. And they include the A7 IV, the A1, the A7S III, the A7R5, the FX3, the FX6, and the A9 III. And at this stage, all of those cameras are using the Gen 3 bus. It is rumoured that we might see the A1 II coming out soon. It may well have the Gen 4 bus. And if that is the case, I'm sure Gen 4 cards will be way more expensive than the Pergear cards we find here today. And of course, let's not forget that the Gen 4 bus will be compatible with Gen 3 cards. When it comes to video, Pergear state that they have a sustained write speed of 380 megabytes. And as I said, I've had cards running now for 4 or 5 years. There's been absolutely no issues with them, yet Pergear do offer a 5-year warranty. Of course, that doesn't include you standing on it. Just to be clear, Pergear does not pay for me to talk about this card. The opinions of this card and all of their cards are absolutely my own. I do get to keep the card so I can continue to test it and so that I can tell you things like, yes, these cards are still working after 4 or 5 years. But that's it. All right, I'd love to know your thoughts. Are you a CF Express Type A user? Are you a CF Express Type B user? Which cards do you use? What cards do you like to use? What cards don't you like to use? And have you experienced, as some of us have talked about, different cards seem to have different thermal properties. I think this is really important. And so not all cards are made equal, not only when it comes to speed, but how they handle heat. I'd love to hear your stories in regards to that. All right, it's been so good to see you. And if this is your first time here, I would love to see you again. So please do subscribe, please share, and please like. All right, bye for now.